Karin Olofsdotter is Sweden's ambassador to the United States. Her extensive diplomatic experience includes having served as ambassador to Hungary, a representative to the EU, and she was part of the Swedish delegation to NATO. She's the first woman to serve in Sweden's top diplomatic post in Washington, D.C., which is most relevant to our topic today, gender parity through diplomacy. Madam Ambassador, thanks, and thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
I want to ask you first about this feminist foreign policy that emerged in 2014, and then Sweden's claim to be the first feminist government. What's the backstory? How did this come about?
I think the government then that was elected in 2014, the Social Democratic, and it's a coalition, Social Democratic and Green Party, they just somehow had enough. You know, we've been talking about this for so long, but we don't really get there. You know, we are slowly moving women's issues ahead, but not to the speed that you would actually like. So the Prime Minister declared himself a feminist, and that the government was feminist. And that means that not only foreign policy, but within all the government dossiers, we always, for instance, have to do a gender analysis on all policy decisions. What does this have any bearings for gender issues? If not, okay, fine. If it does, so how do we make sure that it also is beneficial for both men and women? So that's like on the broader sense. And then the foreign minister, of course, then got feminist foreign policy. So when we do foreign policy, we really try to look at women's representation, women's rights, and women's resources. So the 3 R's they are called. And
so not just symbolic, you're talking about technical moves.
Yes. So we have, we are one of the largest development donors in the world, with the 6th largest actually. We give 1% of BNI. And in all development cooperation projects, we have to look at gender issues. We are now on the United Nations Security Council. We have been, we are non-permanent members, so we have 1.5 year to go. But in all the discussions, in all the mandates coming out of the United Nations Security Council, women, peace and security is in. When it's related to crisis management and so on. So actually 100% of all the mandates coming out of the Security Council last year had women and security in them. So we have really, of course that's a paper, but we also think that when it's on paper it actually means something when you are going to implement it. So in various fields we really try to look at how we can promote women in every field.
So this is such an obvious question, but forgive me for asking it, because we assume, we all agree this is a good idea.
Yeah.
But why is it important?
It's just that we're 50% of the population.
That obvious.
Do you
I just want to say, you never know
another
how people will
argument?
answer that question.
No, to me, both personally and as a diplomat and a working person, how could it not be equal? How can we even debate this issue?
And yet some do.
Yes. And
is there any pushback within Sweden at all? I mean, you could imagine in other countries, we just saw these remarks from the airline executive the other day.
Yeah.
Things like that are still out there.
Yes.
How about within your country?
Well, first I think when the government took this, stance on feminism, it was laughed about a bit, but it's not anymore. And we have elections in the fall, and I would assume that even if the other part of the aisle wins, they will still, continue to drive gender equality. It's across the board, with the political parties, because both we see that even if we are one of the most equal societies in the world, for instance, there's a pay gap. Women earn 87% of a man's salary. That's of course not acceptable. Women take much more parental leave than men, even though we have extremely generous parental leave possibilities for both sexes, of course. Women are more home with the kids than men are, and why should it be so? We are all parents. And, everyone has had a mother. And why wouldn't you want your mother to be as equal as your dad?
Yeah. So how do you gauge progress in the sense that it's sort of like any bad news now, we hear it more.
Yeah.
So in the midst of this Me Too movement, things emerge that suggest we have a long way to go, and yet it's less tolerated. So how do you measure that when you're trying to figure out where we are?
Well, I think the Me Too movement was, in my country, extremely strong, and in a way different from the United States, where it was mostly the entertainment industry that came out.
Right.
But in Sweden, it was basically an outcry from all
All
female, all sectors of working life where there are women. Coming out and saying that, we have been harassed in this way. You got many personal stories coming out. People were not afraid to talk about it anymore. So I really do think that in a lot of workplaces, this will not be accepted behavior anymore. I think the punishment or consequences for anyone who is doing sexual harassment will be much more severe. So that's extremely positive. Then, of course, it's hard to know how you measure success. If we get the pay gap to diminish, that's, of course, one indicator. If we get more men to take parental leave, for instance, that's one indicator. When it comes to foreign policy and development, cooperation and defense, and also trade, if we can see concrete results through our actions, like we did on the Security Council, I think that's a very good track record, that we were actually listened to, and we got the texts right. Then, of course, we have to walk the walk, as you say in America as well, and see to that these issues are actually implemented. And of course, we realize as well this is not something we change overnight. But how anyone today in today's world could not think that we all should be equal is, at least to me and my government and my country, unimaginable.
What is it about Sweden that puts you in the driver's seat here? What do you think? Why are you leading the way?
I think, to many people's surprise, Sweden is an extremely individualistic society. There's something called the World Cultural Survey, where you look at individualism and also secularism. We are the most secular country in the world, and also the most individualistic country in the world. So our social safety net that we have, and we pay quite high taxes, but for that we also get very good services, etc. It's all constructed in a way to make the individual, no matter who you are born to, in what family circumstances, you should always be able to excel. So it's in a way similar to the American dream. It's just a different construction. So we are an extremely egalitarian society from the beginning. But then, of course, men and women were not really equal, but men should have the same.
It's a natural evolution of that
Yes,
thinking.
it is. It really is. That everyone should have the possibility to be, its utmost, or how you say that.
Right. You must be happy to see Canada following your lead and becoming the next feminist foreign policy nation. Do you sense any momentum globally?
Well, I think, given what I said about the Security Council, that we actually got such support for what we were doing is, of course, good. In many instances, we see a backlash, or not going as well as we want. But then we've seen in other instances, for instance, in peace negotiations, that when women have been allowed to be included, we have actually gotten better and more stable peace solutions and more long-lasting peace. So I think in that sense, you can see that people or governments realize that this is really important. And I also, many of the world's leaders are, of course, men. And if you talk to them and say, oh, don't you want to grow your economy? And they all say, yes, of course. And you do that through increasing women's participation in the labor force. So if you can reach, we have 80% of women, or 80% of women in the labor force. Those are issues that are very strong messages, because most political leaders want to have a better economy for its people, of course. And then women is a very important factor. So we can be an example, and we always bring that up as an example. Then, of course, things are very slow.
One area that you can anticipate pushback is in foreign assistance. When some might see it as meddling in other countries' policies. When you want to, have you experienced any of that? So just in general?
Yes, of course, it's not always easy, but it's the Swedish taxpayers' money that we spend on development cooperation. So, of course, we bring also our values to the table. Then, of course,
that's where I could see some people pushing
Yes,
back.
of course, that can be, of course, a challenge. But so far, we haven't really seen any resistance. We have actually bilateral issue with the United States, where the present administration doesn't want to work on sexual and reproductive health rights to the extent that we would like to see. So, of course, that then makes it more difficult for our development cooperation, because so many of medical clinics where we have development cooperation do both general healthcare, but also sexual reproductive rights and so on. So that's an issue, for instance, where we've seen backlash. But we really hope that we can find ways to cooperate on this, because we don't want to risk, women's lives in illegal abortions and so on, which we know will happen if the funding is not there.
That's what the studies show clearly.
Yes.
So what happens next? What are the next steps? You mentioned there's the pay gap that needs to be addressed. What would you like to see happen, and what are the next natural steps to move this forward?
Yes, domestically, pay gap is one issue, and as I said, parental leave is one. Even though we have, probably the most generous parental leave system in the world, still far too few men actually use it to the extent that would be beneficial for women as well, because it's only when women and men take equal care of their families that it will never be an issue that you're a woman applying for a higher level job. Right. So if we really want to be able to have the same possibilities, we also must share family life and do take care of both our elderly parents, but also our children, and that's I think one of the most important ways to actually get to a more equal society. So that we need to work on much more, and that also globally, that of course women should have the same access to education, to creating their own economy and be independent, so that they can make their own choices. That's the least you can expect, I think, of our society. I
think I said that was my final question. I have one more final question. In your role as ambassador, when you're speaking to American diplomats or members of the government or private citizens, is this something they're interested in? And do you see any percolation within American minds about America joining this club?
Yeah. I always get questions. Not everyone knows that we have a feminist government and so on, but a lot of people actually know about our welfare state, and there are both misconceptions that we are like a perfect socialist state, which we are absolutely not. We're a capitalistic society just like everyone else, but with a welfare system. So there are some misconceptions that I have to explain usually. And then also there is a curiosity on how we do it, and especially among women, I think, because in the United States there are many extremely well-educated women, but who are at home, and that's also if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you would like to work, how can you combine work life and parenthood? So I many times get a discussion on that. And this year I'm actually a single mom myself, because my husband and son, they are moving here in the summer, and I'm here with a teenage daughter, and I can really understand the struggles being a single parent. It's tough.
I was raised by a single parent for many years till my mom remarried.
But she did well.
Well, that's kind of you. Very diplomatic of the ambassador. But no, I hear you. Very diplomatic.
But so I think it's if a woman or a man wants to work and combine that with parenthood, that should be possible, because that's the only way we'll have higher birth rates, which we all need, of course, with demography, or the older generations getting older and older. We need more children, and how do you combine that? We must find ways of combining, self-fulfillment in a way and family.
Yes.
Otherwise, we will not sustain ourselves in a way.
Yeah. Well, Ambassador Olofsdotter, thank you for joining us. You said, how could anyone argue against this? We pride ourselves in our nonpartisanship, but I think this is one issue that we can take a position on. Onward to 50 by 50.
Absolutely, and earlier.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure.